Happy summer. I am excited because Porscha is here today and I love conversations with Porscha. I was just talking and praying together if we come on, and I was just telling or talking about my prayer and being reminded that how much her life just radiates. If you know her peace and her spirit just radiates Jesus and his love. And it's such an encouragement to me to know her story and know what she's walked through and the fact that she is where she is today. And I'm excited to be able to talk to her more and share and learn more about her story and be able to share it with you of how she found God in the midst of really hard circumstances and really hard things. And so, Porscha, will you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am Porscha Green. I'm the Advocate Coordinator with the Eastern Region here at Call to Peace Ministries. I've been with the organization now for 3 years. Um, I came to the organization as a result of an encounter with Joy, and we just kept running in each other. And she finally pulled me on in 2021, and I've been here since. Um, but I have a background. I've did community social work for many, many years. I think this year will make 18, 19 years I've been doing social work. And so I started out in the community working with the youth. Of course, they were at risk youth, so they have been experiencing some trauma of some sort, or having mental health issues, and it interfere with their ability to function in the communities. And that would lead to work with families in crisis, trying to keep those families together, which also we have encounters when it comes with abuse of all forms, and sometimes substance abuse, and many other things that families encounter. And so absolutely love that work. It's probably my favorite work. And started working with adults with severe and persistent mental illnesses, homelessness, substance abuse issues. So I've had a wide range of work that I've done. And I felt like I was able to bring a lot of that work here to Call to Peace, and those skills and the knowledge that I've developed over the years, excuse me. But Call to Peace has given me, a lot of special skills and knowledge as well. Shout out to Dr. Deborah and the team for the advocacy training, because it's gave me a wealth of knowledge. It's given me language. And I made a vow to God, like, anytime that I meet someone, because I've had encounters over the years, I just didn't have the language to give them. But I made a vow that anytime that I make a connection with someone and they don't have the language when they're telling me about the situations, because I run into people all the time. And since then I've been able to give people language, which has been a blessing, and it's drastically changed their perspective and their about their life and what they're experiencing. So Call to Peace has definitely been a gem in my life, and I am able to just share experiences and help as many people as possible, including our advocates and the survivors that we serve here. So yes.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all that. And we're grateful that you are here. And yes, a huge shout out to Dr. Deborah and her advocacy courses. And I'll drop a link into that since you mentioned that here. I'll put it in the comments below for after our interview ends. So if you're interested, if you're a counselor or a social worker or want to learn more about advocacy, we highly recommend the advocacy courses. So I'll drop the link there. And let's get started with today's conversation. And that is, where is God when life hurts and my world is crumbling apart? And I love what you said one time, Porscha. I don't look like what I've been through. And I'm like, no, you don't look like what you've been through. Not at all. So don't let her amazingness and the work that God's done in her life and her confidence and the ability to share things make you think that maybe she's never walked through really hard things. And
Yeah.
so, will you tell us maybe a little bit about your story, a little bit of your background, and then we'll get into how you found God in those situations?
Yes, so I grew up in the outside of Fayetteville, North Carolina, and so um I I I was in a single parent home for most of my life, in and out of that area. We've traveled, we moved a lot, but during that time, I experienced some abuse at the hands of my mother's partners, and her husband. So I was and not and some family members too. So I was the definition of, the child that experienced, you would see, chronic trauma. So like I experienced not just one occasion, but multiple occasions of trauma. And so with that, I've been, um, it's been physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And so luckily, out of all of that, my mom was, she was able to get me some therapy. It didn't last long, but it gave me enough to hang on to. So there's some things that I learned through that time, that helped me keep going. Like learning how to journal was a huge thing for me, because when I didn't have an outlet, when I didn't have anyone to talk to, I was able to write things down. Um, and of course, because of all that happened, and like me going into middle school, everyone knows that middle school is just like the worst, probably the one of the worst transitions ever. Like you're going into, an environment, new environment with your peers, people you don't know, and you're switching classes and going through all these changes. And then, I'm going through all these changes at home, right? And so, I was bullied. I was talked about. I got into plenty of fights. I was a fighter in my day, so
Really?
yes,
So,
I was a fighter. But you know what? That fighting with my hands was because I couldn't fight with my mouth or my voice, and so I learned. Now I tell people like I was a fighter, but Lord showed me how to fight. Like He showed me how to truly fight, um, and it fights, with through my healing. I've been able to heal and fight, by showing people how you don't have to be the way that you are, and calling things out. Like I always say, now that I say I'm being comfortable with saying that, I feel like I'm a voice, for people who don't have a voice and who don't have to know how to express what they're experiencing, so helping them navigate through that. But I know I'm going all over the place, but I'm kind of creating my
oh no,
story to be a little bit
I
light here.
yes.
So, with that, there's the fighting, the anger I experienced, but I excelled in school. I did well. I talked a lot, but I did well in school. But I had to move out. And my mom, I wrote my memoir on this too, so some of the stuff I'll probably skip over. But when I reported the abuse, the great thing about that was that my mom listened to me. She listened, she heard me, and she did something about it, because the trauma is increased when no one listens to you. Like you're re-traumatized because people are not listening to you. But the greatest part is that my mom listened to me. She heard me. She called the police. I was removed from my mom's, home. I stayed with my grandmother, which is probably the greatest thing that probably could have happened to me, because, I was able to grow a relationship with my grandmother. I definitely just reframed that, but I was able to grow a more depth, a deeper relationship with my grandmother. God rest her soul, because she's not here today. But so um, that happened, and then of course I continued to, go to school, But then in my teenage years, I, got a little rebellious. I didn't want to be at home, and as I grew older, even I realized is that I didn't want to live in the house where the trauma happened. It was just like I was trying to escape home. I wanted to go out, wanted to be an adult, kind of sort of. I wanted to be out, as a child, and living life. And exploring what the world offered, because I didn't like what had happened at home. And my mom was a single parent, so I had to help take care of my siblings, right? But I didn't want to be the second mom. I wanted to go out and I wanted to hang with my peers and do, but it was limited. And so, I ran away from home at one point, like, and I went to go stay with my grandmother, my other grandma way across town. And so, I had people who were there in my path that even though I went against what my mom wanted me to do, they had people who was there were supporting me during that time, and of course I ran away, but of course I came back. And it was just so many emotional things that I experienced at the time. But, I made it through school, and I went to college. And unfortunately, through college, prior to college, I was, uh, promiscuous. I was, dabbling in marijuana and, drinking and stuff like that. And, just trying to swallow all of my sorrows and what I've experienced over the years. But when I got to college, um, relationships started getting into relationships that I shouldn't have been in. And so, one relationship that, was in my senior year was probably the turning point. It's probably the most, um, real relationship that I think I had. Like in my senior year, I got into a relationship with this guy, and um, he was abusive towards me, emotionally. He did things that were coercive, and he would take my car. He would use me for my money. Like he would take my car and leave me stranded all day. Like there was all these things that would happen, and the Lord just one day, like I had a breakdown in my senior year, y'all. This is my senior year in college. Like I had an emotional break. I still to this day remember walking the night before, um hold on, walking around my the lake and um praying about what I wanted God to do. And the next day I had to turn in my paper. I had to turn in a paper. And when I turned in the paper, but when I was sitting in front of the building, I was bawling, crying so hard. And during those tears, like it was a release, literally. I released everything in that relationship, and I decided that was the end of it. And so even though it didn't last as long, it was long enough. It was like 8, 9 months long enough. Like it was horrible.
Yeah.
And from there, I literally found God. Even more, I drew closer to Him. I was so committed. I became a servant for Him. I was doing in ministry, doing a lot of ministry, and I was just doing a lot of things that helped build me up and help me find myself in Him. And because of that, years and years later, probably like 2, 3 years later, I ended up finding my husband found me. And so I've been happily married. For this year, it'll be 13 years. And so, because of all of that I experienced, I was able, and even with the work I was doing, I was learning stuff about myself. I always say that God gave me He gave me more healing as I was helping other people heal. And
Yes.
so, because of that, I was able to find myself in Christ, lean into Him. Like, I felt like I got delivered from a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
And because of that, I was able to grow into a healthy relationship with my husband.
I love that. I love hearing your story because some of this is like shocking to me. I'm like, just knowing you personally, I'm like, wait, what? Fighter? But I'm like, I love what you shared about the Lord showed you how to fight. And so many people who've been through trauma are fighters. That's how you learn how to survive. And so, I love how the Lord gave you your words and gave you definitions for things, and then you're able now to give other people a voice. And I'm sure Call to Peace and the advocacy course was a huge part of giving you more words to understand that and everything. So I have a couple questions for you, and I'm thinking for people who are watching today, and that is how do you answer that of where was God when you're being abused as a child? Where was God when those things were happening?
So, man, I think that I was in. I think my family has really helped, and I think that I was able to find God in my family. My family provided outlets for me. Like my aunt, when my mom didn't go to church, my aunt took me to church, and so I was able to find like God in those moments. Like I was able to find it in writing and drawing and in the arts, the movies, the music. Like I found solace in things that were accessible to me. So I was able to have cope in those things, like being around family. My family still supported this to this day. They know my story. They know what I experienced. But I think God used my family. God used my family. God used my friends, because my friends were my outlet.
Yes.
I had a friend that I would go visit all the time. She was like the only friend my mom would let me go over spend the night with, because my mom wanted to protect me. She didn't want me to go anywhere because she didn't want things to happen to me again. She wanted to keep me safe. But my friends, my family, like, even though it didn't look pretty, like what I was experiencing, God was there in the midst of it all. Like, He was able to show me moments. And still today, like, I find God in everything. Like, there's moments where I'm talking to people and I find God. Like, there's moments where I see things happen in someone's life and I'm like, man, that's God. Because it's affirming to what I know, who I know God to be in His spirit. And so it's been a blessing to have people, the right people in my life. And, even though it felt like when I was going through all those things, I didn't know why those things were happening to me, I was still able to find God in people and places, things, opportunities, and it helped me significantly.
Wow, I love that. And I think that for listeners watching, excuse me, it's easy to be like, okay, well, that's great. How do I do that in my practical life? And I'm thinking about that. And like, wow, like looking for people around you that are showing you Christ and showing you God as a way that God is showing up in your life. And sometimes we want to think that, oh, or even looking back at our lives and seeing the way God showed up with people, we want to think, oh, wow, God, you didn't show up and rescue me. You didn't show up and deliver me. You didn't make this stop. So where were you? But like, we live in a world where there's free choices and we live in sin. Well, we're not in sin, like committing sin by being abused, but we live around sin and sin happens to us. But in those things, God is there, and God is often there through other people that are pointing us to Him and His love, and also through songs and through art and through writing and things like that. That's where God sometimes shows up, is our ability to be able to um, get it out through singing and writing and other things. So I like
Yes.
how you shared those things and pointed that out, because sometimes we just want concrete answers of like, God was here. This is exactly where He was. And this is
Hmm.
exactly what God did. But it's not always that. And sometimes it's helpful to look back and to be like, wow, when you're sharing that, like I can see things where God showed up in my life. Like, it wasn't in a Christian family until I was 13, but God showed up with Christian people, like just randomly, you know what I mean? And it's just like God shows up in different ways to show us His love. And we never know how those things impact our lives or how God is using them to open, how they're praying for us and how God's using it to open our hearts. And so, yes,
Right.
anything else you want to share on that, about God working through people and things?
Man, that's all I can say. Like, that's, even looking back now, like, it was the people that were in my life. I had to find God. You said, how do you find God? I had to find Him. I had to look around and see what looked like God, who was of God. And there was people my mom was connected to. There was babysitters. There was people my mom knew for a long time, that showed me what a healthy family looked like, that showed me what a healthy marriage looked like, that gave me glimmers of hope and allowed me to see what God actually can do in the lives of other people. So, I had to open my eyes to see, right, literally, and not focus on what I was in, but to look around and see what God had around me.
I love that. That's so good. And I feel like that's our like opportunity too for us, that we get to be the hands and feet of Jesus and be those
Hmm.
things with other people that are there.
Hmm.
And so many times people are like, oh, I wanted God to come and do this physically. I'm like, well, that's just not how it works. But God
Hmm.
uses those whose hearts are surrendered to Him
Hmm.
to bring us forth and lead us. And I can look at those things in my own life and just like thinking and processing. I know for me, I'm also abuse survivor, childhood abuse survivor. And I didn't have anybody I was able to reach out to. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody.
Hmm.
I was in a situation, it was just, I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I spent hours in prayer. And I want to say, And it sounds strange, but that's just what doesn't sound strange. But I mean, I literally spent hours in prayer every day.
Mm.
And I feel like God met me in those things and met me there with his spirit. And even if there's nobody around us, like it's knowing that God is there. God
Yeah.
is there reaching out. And there was one time, I'm gonna go into it, but like it was a crazy story. I would wake up in the middle of the night with demons around my bed. I don't want to get to spiritual warfare, but like went through something really tragic,
Mhm.
and I couldn't figure out how to make it stop. And it was
Mhm.
horrific. I'm waking up nightmares in demons. It's terrible.
Mhm.
And so I remember just crying out to God. I had nobody to talk to. God led me to a counselor online. And I cried out to God that God would just help me. I remember, and God's like, call this person. I
Mhm.
called the counseling office that normally has somebody answered by a secretary. The counselor answered. I told them what was happening, and they said, that's soul ties. You have to do
Mhm.
this to break it. You've got, this is what's happening. And they gave me just a few words of wisdom. But
Mhm.
that meant so much to me to be seen and validated and to have the words to be able to, um, things to do. So, like, God, that was, even though it's brief, like God showed up. That's God's way of saying, I see you. I care for you. I'm there.
Mhm.
I'm sending this person, I'm sending Porscha, out, and she's
Mhm.
been through this and she knows my heart and can tell you about where I am in this situation and how I show up. And so I just want to encourage people today, like cry out to Jesus to send people, cry out to Jesus to go to him and to ask him, and you'll be amazed at what God sends along. If you're here watching this at Call to Peace and you're
Mhm.
walking through amazing abuse, God has sent you here, and God is saying, I see you. We're here to help you. And because of the heart of generous donors, and so we're able to offer free advocacy and walk alongside you through this. So I'll let you keep going. I was going to answer soul ties. I will answer that very briefly. Yes, I don't want to get into that because I don't want to get into a theological discussion too much on here, but there is a such thing as soul ties, especially if there is if it's a more demonic situation, and so you have to go through and renounce those things in
Mhm.
that situation. So
Yes. Yes, soul ties is a real thing because when we connected, I mean, we're in connection with each other, like, and I'm not gonna go into depth, but when we connect to people, like, there's parts of us that goes within that relationship, and so when we separate ourselves, there's still remnants of that that's still
yes,
there, and so we have to, even with that relationship that I talked about, that was horrible, I there were still remnants of that there. I had to ask God to take all of that away.
hmm
And tell me what, when I was experiencing something, tell me, what does this mean? Like, where is this coming from? And so there are remnants of relationships that stay with us.
yes,
And Yes, so it is challenging, but we cry out. God wants us to cry out to Him. Like, He wants us to talk to Him. He wants us to ask for His help. Like, He doesn't. It's not our job. Like, there's things in our life that are way bigger than us. A lot of things are way bigger than us, and we can't handle them. We don't have the capacity to take on what it would take to remedy that situation. That's who God is. He's Almighty. He's all knowing. He can heal. He can deliver. He can set free. And I like to believe that He's continually making me free. Like, I'm not completely healed. I've healed from a lot of stuff, but I feel that He is continually helping me be free, by bringing things up. Like I talk about the fighting situation. Like, I don't fight with my hands anymore. Like, I fight in prayer. Like, I
yes,
fight in prayer, and the Holy Spirit leads and guides me on what I'm supposed to do. Like, and so
yes.
that's where I am.
I love that so much. Yes, it's fighting in prayer because I think God can propel us to do things to fight, but we have to get in prayer first and hear his spirit, and he tells us which way to walk. Because when we realize we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, we wrestle against
Mhm.
principalities and powers, and those things are too strong and more powerful than we are. And when we go into that, we got to go where God tells us to go and speak where God says speak, and we got to wait until he says go. It's like I love where he talks about the fate, this centurion, how he would come and he said, yes, I say to one, he waits and he goes. And the Lord said, I have
Mhm.
found such faith in all of Israel. And so I think that's kind of similar how God works when we fight our battles is we have to wait and we have to listen to him and get into prayer with him. So I love that. I
Yep.
don't know why I wanted to share that. So
Amen. Yes.
well, thank you so much. That was really encouraging. It gave me a lot of things to look back on too in my own life of just being like, wow. And I can look back and see and think about, well, what if that person really was well, I know they were, but like sent by God, even though I didn't become a Christian through that person, but that person like praying and answering questions. And it's
Mhm.
just like, wow, that person was a godsend. That's God's way of showing up in our lives. And to know
Absolutely.
we never know how we're able to influence other people too with our lives, like what God is doing in and through us when we surrender ourselves to Him and are willing to fight His battles for other people as well and get
Amen.
there with them. And we don't know how we get to find out in eternity how that impacted them. And
Absolutely.
is there anything?
Absolutely. We might not ever know how we've had an impact on people. Just know that if we're doing the work of the Lord, then we're making an impact. We might not see the actual person flourish and grow, but we'll know that we planted the seed or we watered them. But we'll let God do the work that needs to be done.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciated hearing your perspective and hearing things. I feel encouraged. And for those watching today, I know she gave a huge plug as she's our advocate coordinator for the Eastern
Mhm.
region of about the advocacy course, the impact of that, as well as talking about people showing up and being the hands and feet of Jesus. If you're in domestic abuse, or you think you might be in domestic abuse, or you're confused about your husband's anger problem, I would encourage you to reach out to calltopeace.org and request an advocate. And we're here to be the hands and feet of Jesus to you and to walk alongside you because God sees the oppressed and God's heart is for the oppressed. And we want to let you know that He sees you today. And if you're here, it's not by accident. It's because the Lord sees you as well and has brought you here to know that you're not alone, that He's here with you and He's fighting with you. So just get in prayer and cry out to Him and see what He says to you today. So, is there anything else you want to close out with, Porscha?
Um, I'll just say that for anyone who may have a child that may be experiencing abuse, I think connection is the hugest thing. I don't want to say this statistic wrong, but there's a statistic that says that the best thing that a child can, or even a teenager can have when they've experienced a trauma is connection. So having
Mhm.
connection with the right adult, being able to express themselves and talk, the Lord gave that to me. He gave me connection with other people, and I'm thankful for that. So having connection, and you know, it increases resiliency and thank God, I'm so thankful that I'm resilient.
Yes.
It is, I still go through things but God along the way is, every trial that we have, like we've gotten a new tool in our belt, to
Mhm.
go, to war in the spirit realm, um, and to be able to serve and love and flourish into what God has called us to be. And so I'm thank God for resilience. And so connection is key, even for adults. We need connection, we need community.
Yes. Thank you. That's a wonderful way to close out. Yeah. And we, even today, as a trauma survivor, we still need to be in community and connection with other people.
Mhm.
So thank you for sharing that. Well, thank you for joining us today. If y'all want to connect with Porscha, I know she's got a Facebook page, and a book as well. So Porscha, if you want to comment on here afterwards and let people know how they can find you and connect with you, if they want to resonate with your story and want to reach out and know more, that would be great. And I hope all of y'all have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you again soon.